real conversations, and some hard truths. Gangs, drugs, and guns. Giving a voice to those willing to sacrifice. We have stories that need to be told. We have lessons that need to be taught. Protect and serve. Welcome to The Quiet Professional. Hey everybody, welcome back. Nathan Rome is with you. Today we are going to be talking about money laundering, organized crime, and some of the political influence that we see resulting from that. For this, I have William Gately and Scott McGregor on the show. Just a bit of background on both of them. Will has over 28 years in local and federal law enforcement and is a retired assistant special agent in charge with the U.S. Customs Office of Investigations. He's also an expert in international money laundering and long-term undercover investigations. Now he works as a consultant to intelligence and law enforcement agencies in the US, Europe, and Asia. He's also authored a book called The Dead Ringer, an insider's account of the mob's Colombian connection. He's also a licensed private investigator and a subject matter expert for federal law enforcement, intelligence agencies, and private industry. So there's no slowing down in retirement. For Scott, he is former Canadian military intelligence. He was an advisor to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police on transnational organized crime and hybrid warfare threats, and has worked with Five Eyes intelligence agencies on matters of national security. He is now the principal of Close Hold Intelligence Incorporated and has also authored a book, The Mosaic Effect: How the Chinese Communist Party Started a Hybrid War in America's Backyard. So welcome to both of you.
Thanks for having us, Nate.
I couldn't do either of you justice with like a small bio. You guys have pretty impressive resumes, but that's just a small amount of the things that both of you have done. So I'd encourage people to look you guys up and connect with you. But maybe just to start, I'll start talking with you there, Detective. We can talk a bit about how you got into the money laundering world, because it's definitely not a small topic, and I think most people can't wrap their heads around it. But how did you kind of take this on as like a lifelong focus within your career?
Well, I had transferred to U.S. Customs Office of Investigations in March of 78 after almost 8 years as a police officer and detective in Washington, D.C. And we did a little bit of money seizures from drug traffickers and things like that. It was proceeds of crime stuff. There was no anti-money laundering laws. And when I arrived at Customs, there was this vague law that they used to trace money that was intended for or the proceeds of unlawful activity. It was called the Bank Secrecy Act. And it was pretty much a paper crime. It was virtually not filling out a form when you crossed the border that said you were carrying cash or monetary instruments that were bearer negotiable in excess of initially $5,000, and it increased to 10 over a couple of years. So my first assignment was in San Francisco. My second assignment was in Canadian border, small office called Blaine, Washington, which in essence is a tiny little place along the Washington state border. But it's just a half hour south of Vancouver, British Columbia, which is a thriving metropolis of crime. And in fact, I looked over that border, as a guy who was handling multiple cases, 30 new cases a month as a police detective. I wanted some activity. And when I saw the little town I was in, it was sleepy. Had one school bus and 2 gas stations, a grocery store, tiny population. I went up to introduce myself to the RCMP drug enforcement section, and they had never seen a customs agent. In fact, I had to tell them exactly who I was and what my job was, because they looked at customs as kind of a part-time job with people out of work in Canada, and they just did inspections at the border and not very good ones.
Could you explain, maybe just before we go further, could you explain for the audience what does customs do that's different from, say, well, DEA focus on drugs, ATF got firearms component, but what do customs specifically do?
U.S. Customs was the original law enforcement agency of the United States. It was founded in 1789. They've had special agents or investigators since 1789. You could go to any border office anywhere in the country, and you'd find an old arrest book where everything was written in the arrest book. It was a giant binder, probably 4 feet across, 3.5 feet tall, and probably had 500 pages. And you could sit there and take down notes from, and I read one on the border there, and it was about a special agent in the early 30s, and he had received information about opium smugglers coming across from Vancouver, and he had staked out in the woods and trapped them in the middle of the night, had a shootout with both of them, killed one, arrested the other, reported to the magistrate, and he went on to a new case. So that gives you a kind of an image of
the different time.
Time passed, but the jurisdiction for U.S. Customs was anything that crossed the border in trade or crime. So anything from defrauding the United States to smuggling something into the United States or unlawfully exporting something from the United States. So your criminal, 99% of the time, was somebody from another country. And that kind of focus, always you had an opportunity to do big cases.
I was going to ask, so do you need to know like all the trade agreements too, like especially things like NAFTA or whatever
it was, yeah.
Countries have?
You need to know the 1930 Tariff Act and what could cross and what couldn't cross, what the laws were that prohibited certain materials. But I focused on drug traffickers who were moving money from Canada into the United States for the purpose of purchasing drugs. Well, there's no law that prohibits that unless you don't sign the form. Or you say no to a declaration to a customs inspector at the border that you're not in possession of $10,000 in cash or bearer instruments. So I focused on that. I thought that would be a good way to get into major trafficking operations without focusing on drugs, because the likelihood of Canadians smuggling drugs into the United States was almost nil. Not happening.
Okay.
So
that sure has changed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sure has changed over the years. But back then it was almost nil. You wouldn't. Occasionally you saw some heroin come in and it was in transit from Thailand or somewhere in that zone. But that's what you would see at the border.
So you go from focusing on this stuff on the Canadian side, and then at what point do you kind of transition into focusing on the cartels in your career?
Well, after I left at Blaine office, I started working on organized, not cartel activity, but in connection to cartel activity in San Diego. We were looking at what we called air smuggling, using aircraft to bring in drugs. And these guys were part of an old faction of drug smugglers in the United States and Canada. They called themselves the Eternal Brotherhood of Love. And they did everything from smuggling loads out of Mexico and aircraft to motherships out of Thailand. So they were known in Canada because they would bring a mothership of Thai weed into the San Juan de Fuca Islands, and with the intent to bring it into Canada. But I started working on cartel operations in the time I was in San Diego, and I was typically just focused on the drug stuff. We did see a little bit of the money activity, but it wasn't until I was transferred to Miami that we saw major money activity. We still didn't have anti-money laundering. This was late 81. But we had an operation called Greenback in Miami. And Greenback focused solely on cartel cash moving outside of the United States, the proceeds of their cocaine sales primarily in the United States. So we looked for big cash loads leaving. And we were very, very successful with Greenback. And this was 4 years before there was anti-money laundering.
Really? That's obviously Scott could probably speak to this better than I could, but the money laundering side of things in Canada is very weak. We don't really go after this very much. I'm surprised the US, they always seem like they're way ahead, but wow, in the 80s, that's when it kind of started.
In the 80s, we were very, very active. And like I said, it was 4 years before anti-money laundering laws. And we were just going on the fact that if you loaded a Lear with 20 million cash, you weren't going to file a form before you took off. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of money we chased. We also chased it into the banks. We set up on banks. We watched them carry duffel bags, 2, 3, 10 into the bank in cash, and they were running that cash into the bank accounts, placing it. The first level of money laundering before money laundering existed, as a crime. And then they'd layer it out from that bank, like Ocean Bank and Capital Bank in Miami, and then integrate it into major accounts around the world. So we saw all that activity, and we used that when we initially helped structure the money laundering statutes.
Do we see that at all on the Canadian side there, Scott? Any kind of activity like this?
Oh, yeah. In my time, it's a little bit different. A lot of the international cartels, but also the triads and others, they utilize dongles a lot. So they work with their own banks, usually. Bank of China is a well-known one of them. Minsheng Bank has been tied into some of these things. So there's lots of different ways that they've moved the money. But I want to ask Bill, Bill, can you explain a little bit about structuring? Because in Canada, that's not one of the laws that we have. And I noticed in the casino stuff that structuring was used extensively by the United States to indict people, and we don't have that.
That came out of Operation Greenback. We used to call it Smurfing. And this, again, before there was a structuring law, we looked at it as, because they would create 1,000 accounts in a dozen banks, and their deposits, when they'd structure the deposits less than $10,000. Pre-money laundering, that, of course, that's not a crime. You could say that there was a conspiracy to violate Title 31, Section 5313, which is reporting to the bank cash deposit of $10,000 or more, and that they had a conspiracy to underreport, but making that case was almost impossible because there were literally hundreds of these, what we called Smurfs, out there making the deposits, and they were getting a minor fee for doing it. They didn't know who their boss was. They just knew they took that much out of the bag and made the deposit in the bank. And they were given accounts that they would make those deposits to. So once we got the Anti-Money Laundering Act in '86, IRS took on that primarily as their focus for anti-money structuring. So structured accounts like that became a focus, and then the cartels always took the path, and always will take the path of least resistance. When they saw resistance at the bank in the U.S. for doing that, they just started taking the cash completely out of the U.S. and moving it into primarily the Mexican banks. And that started in the mid-'80s, about 86, 80, 87, right after the Money Laundering Act was incorporated. Initially, the Colombian cartels, Cali and Medellin, made contacts in Mexico just to launder their money. And it was an easy move. They didn't have to move the cash offshore from Miami or LA or anywhere else directly into Colombia, where they had no place to place it in a financial institution anyway. They were literally burying it in the ground. They set up the Mexican banks. Two major traffickers in Mexico set up the Mexican banks as their primary money laundering system.
It's interesting because now you'll see that some of these large threat finance hubs, they take different currencies, different countries' currencies, and that's how they're able to manipulate large funds. Not dissimilar to the Smurfing technique, where they use nominees to move money through banks or money service businesses. But they, when you're switching between British pounds and the euro, and so from RMB to pounds to pesos, when you're trying to follow the money, it gets really difficult when it's not just within your country, and you start seeing, like Bill said, 1,000 incorporations, numbered companies moving that money. We see it extensively in Canada, and because our laws are so lax, and the enforcement is limited. For instance, the term anti-money laundering as opposed to counter money laundering. So you're not trying to stop it. You're just facilitating it.
You're just against it.
Yeah, you don't like it.
You don't like it.
Because we have PCML TFA, so the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, Terrorist Financing Act, and that holds some interest. It holds some interesting penalties, but it's very rare that it gets used. Unlike the United States, where we do see a lot more activity, they have the ability for every transaction. So every suspicious transaction that's not reported or incorrectly reported, it's like a $500,000 fine. So when you have, in my instance, casinos that were, having these issues, per instance, that would have been a massive penalty, which, would have caused them to be a lot more strict in how they handle their money, accepting $700,000 and $20 bills in a hockey bag. And this is, it's all public now. That just doesn't happen. I spoke to my guys in Vegas, and they'd be like, yeah, that would never happen. That just, no one would ever do that.
Well, yeah,
right.
But it was happening. It was happening in the late '70s in Canada. That's how I got introduced in Vancouver.
And it was happening in 2015 here.
Yeah.
And they never got robbed, Bill. Not once. There was not one attempt on millions and millions and millions of dollars in cash in 20s coming in the front door. Not a single instance of one of those people being robbed.
Amazing.
So what I'm wondering is, when you have, so this has been going on in Canada for a long time. Obviously, America had its issues too, but the US made some changes in the 80s. Where's Canada been on all this? How come we have had no changes? And we've had all these inquiries and other things going on.
You like it. You like money laundering.
Yeah, well,
you actually like it.
So that's the thing.
And when I say you, I mean your political infrastructure.
Yes,
really likes it.
Yeah. So, but where are we seeing that influence or infiltration, whatever we want to call it, however far it goes? Is this literally right to the top type of thing? Like, we have to have at the prime minister level, he or she, maybe one day.
You got to like it there. You got to like it there too. Yeah. See, I'll say that. You guys can't. I'll say, yes, your prime minister likes it. And I'll tell you that our president, since Bill Clinton, probably with one exception, liked it. Because the enforcement for money laundering, and I don't say this out of any sense of self-importance, I have not seen one single major case out of the United States since May of 1998.
Hmm.
Not one. No one has gone after a system, a money laundering system, and there are several that are huge. And I don't say that out of conjecture. I say it because I still do this. When I say I consult to intelligence and law enforcement agency, I develop turnkey cases for them because I know that they don't want to do that. And I present them turnkey cases. When I say turnkey, that's complete with the entire system identified, the players at the top identified, the people who are manipulating the system at the direction of the top players. I hand them that as a gift, and they ignore it. They ghost me after the presentation. So yes, the government in the United States likes money laundering.
I've done the same thing.
They do not prosecute people for money laundering.
And when you say 1998, so is that's at the end of Operation Casablanca?
Yeah, that's at the end of Operation Casablanca. I can give you a lot of detail about how much they didn't like it.
Yeah.
From the beginning, from the initiation of the case to the end of it. And they ended it without a need for an ending.
I will put up in the episode description, just so people are aware, a link to a video so they can see you talking about that operation. It was 60 minutes, I believe.
It was.
Yeah, so I can put that up so that people can also review that as well. In Canada, though, I don't think we've seen any major cases. Have we, Scott? Nothing?
There's been attempts. So there was e-pirate and e-nationalize, which went after the same target. I think it was 280 officers or something like that at the RCMP. So it basically everything they had going at that case. So it was the largest money laundering case in Canadian history, and it got thrown out. Yeah, they had a stay of proceedings.
It got thrown out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's some administrative issues and the length of time. So there's you've got only a certain amount of time to present all the evidence, especially when everything's in handwritten Chinese, and some of it's kind of coded.
Of course,
there's only a few people in the world that can do that, and I was fortunate enough to be working with one of them. But yeah, it didn't work out. But an informant was exposed in disclosure, and they couldn't proceed to trial because of the danger to that individual. So it's tough. And then then going after them again in a second attempt, and that fails as well. So now, how do you even proceed when there's such a large network? This is a Chinese network. It's very, very difficult. One of those individuals was murdered in a restaurant, a few years later when they returned from Hong Kong. And people just don't quite understand the level of activity that's going on. They often think it's kind of street thuggy, maybe traditional mafia type stuff. They don't see the state sponsored aspects of what's going on. So the way that things are tied together. Mm-hmm. As you start to go up that food chain, Bill, right? You start seeing, who's been corrupted. And
I've delivered cash from the street at the direction of the head of the cartel, not me personally delivered, but my people delivered it for the Juarez cartel to Mexican officials at a step or two down from the Attorney General of Mexico to his hands in a hotel room in Mexico City. Not once, but 3 times. In that Operation Casablanca, what ended it was our pursuit of their Minister of Defense, or the equivalent of our Secretary of Defense, who reports directly to the President of Mexico, who was offering $1.15 billion laundered cash. He had half of it in New York City, stashed away. He had another half down not down in. He had $0.5 billion in Mexico City, another $500 million in Amsterdam. from European cocaine. He wanted picked up and laundered. That was his personal money. Now, I don't believe it was just his. I believe it was probably himself, his underlings, and a great deal of it belonged to the president.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So, like Scott says, it's state sponsored. Nothing in Mexico, and many South American countries can happen without the consent of the government. Let's look in Mexico. They don't have a law that says that they can't turn their Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Force against the people. They have no law that says that. For the most part, the people in Mexico are disarmed. There's one weapons store in Mexico. It's run by the military. However, they're one of the largest purchasers of U.S. arms in the world. So not only supplying the military supplying the cartels with weapons. The military gives the authority to the cartel to operate. The only time there's a war between the military and the cartels when somebody's cheating.
Mm-hmm. I think for the general public too, the impression is that that whole country is run by the cartels and the government comes second. Like, so maybe they've done a good...
No. The government and the cartel are symbiotic.
Yeah. Yeah.
They don't function without each other. They must coexist, and to coexist, they have to share. Unfortunately, politicians are greedier than cartel bosses. And that's why there's conflict.
You have to go along to get along.
Yeah.
That's why there's conflict. And when there's conflict in Mexico, it's in the tens of thousands that are killed by the cartel.
And there's a lot of cartels. I think people think there's just the ones you see on TV that you hear about. I think last count there's 126 or more cartels, and they splinter all the time. But a lot of those are in Mexico City.
Yeah.
Because they're aligned with political entities and corporate
They're
interests.
all aligned with political. No, there were 38 assassinations this election cycle in Mexico. 38 assassinations. Coincidentally, all 38 were part of the opposition party.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
From a mayor to a congressman to a senator. All 38 were from the opposition party. Kind of started that here this year in the United States. We started assassinating the opposition party.
Yeah. I'm wondering too, so just going back a bit, Bill, you're talking about the turnkey operations that you're giving people. Is that incorporating the whole systems approach that you developed?
Yes.
Okay. So
yes, I would only I'm the only one that ever used the systems approach. And let me give you the genesis of the systems approach.
Yeah.
It was the government of the United States in 1992. We had a new government. We had Bill Clinton as president, and Janet Reno became his attorney general. Janet Reno had a history of being anti-police. If there was a defund the police movement in 92, Janet Reno would have been waving the flag.
Yeah.
And like one of her newer counterparts, she was attorney general for the state, Florida state. And she was a big phony as attorney general. She was more anti-enforcement than she was involved in enforcement. So when she became attorney general, one of her first moves was to attack the undercover operation functions within the Justice Department. That would be the FBI, the DEA, primarily the FBI and DEA, which were the two Justice Department law enforcement agencies. In those years, and many years preceding that, U.S. Customs, IRS criminal investigations, the Secret Service, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms were all Treasury law enforcement agencies. And traditionally, Treasury was the original law enforcement department within government. Because we, as a new nation, Customs had warships and a Customs ensign. And Customs defended the border and defended the currency. or the actual Treasury of the United States. We were the defense mechanism for that, the body that did it, and still carried that moniker as, modern people in the 1990s. So when Janet Reno started shutting down undercover operations, that wasn't good enough for her just to do it in the Justice Department. She sent a memo over to her equal, the Secretary of the Treasury, and said, "You need to do the same." And hers was the 335s. No more than in a money laundering investigation, undercover. No more than 5 million will be laundered. No more than 500,000 will be laundered at any single time. And no defendants not identified in the initial operation plan will be incorporated into the investigation without authority from the Department of Justice. So we figured that was 5 guys. So 5, 5, and 5.
She just picked that because it's...
Well, that was the end of undercover operations it was ridiculous. So she intentionally put them out of the business. And she sent that memo over to Treasury, and Treasury sent it down to Customs Commissioner, and the Assistant Commissioner for Investigations got it. And fortunately, she called me and said, "I think we need to write a new policy or we're going to get shut down." So the policy that pretty much killed DOJ operations was the kingpin theory. If you kill the head of the snake, you kill the snake.
Kingpin fallacy. Yeah.
Except there's a whole bag of snakes.
Yeah.
You can't kill them all because there's a new bag coming. So it was a ridiculous theory to begin with, but it sounded cool. Sounded cool in press conferences. We got the kingpin. And we seized $20 million, but they laundered $40 million. So Janet Reno had ammunition. Well, I wrote a new policy. It was called systems targeting. Systems targeting required you to first identify a money laundering system that incorporated every aspect of money laundering: placement, layering, integration. It incorporated all the people who conducted those aspects of those 3 things. And from cash delivered at the very first level to cash, it finally integrated into legitimate accounts and used in the course of business, throughout the world. So people looked at me and said, "That's ridiculous. No one can do that." I said, it only appears ridiculous unless you get an introduction into the system, which I wrote into the policy. That with an introduction into the system and to become integral to the system, we would function within it. We wouldn't create what everybody calls a sting operation, where we lure people into our storefront so we can get them to say things they normally wouldn't say. I know stings. I was in the very first one in 1974. So, matter of fact, we invented the word, and we didn't really say the word. The newspapers invented it because at a party we held to arrest almost 200 people, we played the theme song for the film, The Sting. So if you put that on videotape, the newspapers will play with it, and that's why they call it the sting opera.
But you know what? I think some of this stuff where they fluff it up for the news and people go out there and, like you're talking about, this kingpin fallacy. It's like they still do this today. They still say, like,
"Yes, I know.
We took them. We got the big one." It's like, that's nice. They were already replaced.
No. They'll say things like, "Oh, we put a big dent in their operation."
Yeah.
You know what we can do with a dent? You don't even need paint and tools anymore.
Exactly.
And the cartel, they don't take dents. They just throw that car over the cliff with the last airplane. They don't. don't think about dents. You have to get into the system that they're operating with. And the final stage of operating in the system was to collapse it from within. Once you're integral in it, to collapse it from within. So I went after the theory that the government of the United States and many governments in Europe and Canada had signed on to. They said the primary money laundering system in the world were the Mexican banks. This is in 1993, and I can show you quotes from people around the world saying it. So I developed an operation plan to enter into the money laundering system. So in order to do that, I needed someone who probably helped to create it. So I looked to the Cali cartel. And I got lucky because an informant that we had in Los Angeles said that he was brokering information from his cousin to us. And I said, well, why didn't your cousin give it to us directly? He says it's too dangerous for him because he's working for Jose Rodriguez Gacha, who was a big cartel operator in Cali, whose nickname was the Mexican. I said, I'd like to talk to your cousin. And you arrange it. So he did. And I met him in Mexico. Sat down with him for a week. He told us all about this system that he established down there, getting all the banks in Mexico to launder the Cali money for Jose Rodriguez Gacha and every other Cali cartel person that signed on, and all of them signed on. He did that. I said, why'd you do that? You were making a lot of money doing this yourself. He says, look, I didn't get into this because I needed money. I was a multimillionaire before I got into this. I got into this because they kidnapped my wife and used her as a rape doll until I said yes. I said yes immediately, and they kept her and tortured her for 2 weeks. I want revenge. Can you give me revenge? I said, well, yeah. You get me in the system. I'll give you all the revenge you can stand. And he did. He put us right in the middle of it. And as we gained actual transactions from the banks that he was dealing directly with, the government of the United States threatened to shut it down and threatened me with prosecution if I didn't shut it down. And I said, well, what's your reason for prosecuting me? You're using an informant that we might indict. Well, I said, well, go ahead and indict him because we have a process for using indicted informants. And they called me into the Department of Justice, sat me down at the Attorney General's conference room table with a row of DEA and U.S. attorneys and the Assistant Attorney General for Criminal, and ordered me to give them the informant, pick up the phone, arrange for his travel to the United States so they could arrest him. I said, well, I'm not going to do that. That violates our policy and procedures. However, if you do want him arrested and you want me to help you, convince the Secretary of the Treasury to order the Customs Commissioner to order me to do it. Until then, he's my informant. And they did, in fact, convince someone at Customs to order me to stop using it. They would not order me to betray him.
Yeah.
So in fact, they thought they had shut down the operation. But now I knew how to get into it, so I needed another person who was in it. And I found that person less than a month later. And within 3 weeks of that person, we had people sitting at our undercover storefront office giving us the authority to launder drug money through their bank in Mexico. Within 3 months of that, we had of the 13 operating banks in Mexico that transferred US dollars, we had 7. 6 months, we had all 13.
Wow.
In a year, we had all 13 of them and 4 banks in Venezuela. Within a year and a half, we had the Ecuadorian banks begging us to let them in to our system. It wasn't our system. We were just an integral part of the system. So we were getting every bank account that operated out of all 13 of those banks in Mexico, the 4 in Venezuela. We were tracking every dollar. And for every dollar we laundered, we were going to seize $2. How do you do that? Well, we had all the bank accounts, so we were going to seize every dollar we could at the end from every one of those bank accounts. And then there was the penalty from every bank that laundered that money. That was going to be 2 times that. So we figured we wouldn't get 3 to 1, but we would certainly get 2 to 1. In fact, in the end, we did. And there should have never been any, because now we had already creeped into the political hierarchy of the Mexican government by their request, not our request. They were asking us to launder their $1 billion in bribe money. And then the United States stepped in again at the Department of Justice and forced us to shut down. So, yeah, the governments of the United States and maybe Canada and most governments around the world, they like money laundering.
Mm-hmm.
They liked it so much in the United States that Janet Reno went down to Mexico and signed an agreement that said we would never do it again.
Yeah.
And guess what? We've never done it again. When I take turnkey operations to the agency that took over the authority of U.S. Customs, HSI, they don't do the operation. They want to do the operation, but it does not get done.
Is this also why the systems approach hasn't been adopted more widely? Because I think this is something you could even use at like ground level, like street level policing, when we're doing smaller drug stuff.
You can. Why care about, whatever the top idiot is at the moment? Because in a place like Chicago or Toronto, he'll be dead tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so you don't need to focus on it. You need to focus on the system they operate.
Yeah.
And get inside. Once you're inside and trust it, you know everything. You know things they don't tell their mother. They're not going to tell their secrets to anyone. They tell them to the people they trust to move their money.
Okay.
The head of the Juarez cartel, Amado Carrillo Fuentes, gave us his private banker at Citibank in New York. His private banker wasn't in Argentina. He was at Citibank in New York. And he introduced him to us in Mexico City in Zona Rosa and said, hey, I have 3 personal accounts there. And when I tell you it's for account A, B, or N, you take it to Citibank New York to this man. To prove to you that the government of the United States likes money laundering, they didn't prosecute that man. They put me in a room without windows, but they did not prosecute that man or Citibank.
Yeah.
Seems like a common theme, Bill.
It is a common thing. It is a common, and people, like you said, it becomes a labyrinth that it looks like it's unsolvable. But once you're inside, it's very simple.
For a lot of the police down to the front line stuff, like it's kind of like you're saying, they look at it and it's like, this doesn't make sense, or it might be too big.
Yeah, that's it.
Once you start running some really good informants, and if a service has kind of the guts and the drive to run agents, it's like it'll all make sense once we have somebody that is working on the inside, right? Or even undercovers to a degree. What I'm wondering too is like, so all the stuff you've seen over your career and the things you've warned about or tried to make change on in the past, are you seeing any kind of themes now? So that you warned about before, hey, here's all these red flags, and nobody's done anything about it. And now today we're kind of suffering the consequences from, because it seems like it's just an ever growing problem. Now, was it the cartels are working with Chinese organized crime in these underground banking schemes that they're running. And it's just like,
Not underground.
yeah.
They're working with the two major banks in Mexico. They're working with Bank of China and they're working with ICBC. And they're major branches in Mexico City. And I would say the cartels got 80% or better of all the drug cash coming out of the US and Canada. If it's flowing south into Mexico, ICBC and Bank of China are the laundering process. And that's a beautiful thing because Mexico, in the last administration and this administration, are bonded together with Cuba, Venezuela, China, and Venezuela is bonded heavily, as is China with Iran. China is bonded with Iran and Venezuela because of the crude oil they can purchase. And we're supposed to be sanctioning. Sanctions are there, but no one's enforcing the sanctions. So both are getting billions every other day in US cash dollars from the Chinese. Where did the Chinese get the US cash dollars? From the Mexican cartel.
Law set up in Hong Kong.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So we're making the Iranians and the Chinese we're making the Iranians and the Venezuelans US dollar cash rich. When in fact, the OFAC regs say they can't move a single dollar. But we've allowed all this to happen because we're not enforcing the laws. We could, and I can get you into that system.
Up here, the Stinchcomb law comes in. People talk about that a lot, like with our disclosure issues. Is there a similar thing in the US? Do you run into similar issues?
What, to disclose undercover operation?
Yeah, well, like with our Stinchcomb.
Well, we have idiots in government who do that without a law. They don't need a law. They just make a press release. And I don't say that because I'm a cynical son of a bitch. I say that because I had at one time a guy named Ray Kelly, who was Undersecretary of Treasury Law Enforcement at the time. After, in the middle of Casablanca, we had a shootout. A Dominican gang tried to rob the Colombians delivering cash to us in broad daylight and in McDonald's parking. If you can imagine that in New York City, at 34th and 10th in New York City. It was a big shootout. We win the shootout. And Ray Kelly, without any prompt from anybody, goes out on the front steps of the hospital where the wounded customs agent is and makes a press release extemporaneously that this was part of a major undercover investigation. Now, to me, that was intentional to shut the thing down. Not just some dummy not knowing better.
That's one of the things I always kind of wonder about too with a lot of this stuff is like how much of it is ignorance, how much is willful blindness, how much of it is just straight up corruption. It seems like a big mix of all of it. So,
well, let's look at ignorance. Who do you think in law enforcement is ignorant of the law? He never passed that ignorant of the law test, I can tell you that. And for a long time, ignorance of the law, unless it's specific intent law, doesn't really matter. That doesn't really matter. And as an officer, you know, if a guy says to you, well, I didn't know speeding in a school zone doubled the penalty, it really doesn't matter if he knows that, does he?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So same thing goes for major crimes. Unless it's specific intent, like filling out a stupid form is specific intent. I intentionally didn't fill it out because I've got 20,000 in my pocket, not 10. Right. So that's a specific intent. But, and then willful blindness. Ray Kelly or anyone like him is not willfully blind. He's intentionally doing that because he's been told by political people above him, we need to end this.
Yeah.
Or we need to not do this. And I know it's true because when I refuse to not or to end something, which had no practical reason to end it, and I was enforcing the law as I was sworn to do, and it was part of an improved multi-agency operation at the secretary level of the United States government. Why is an undersecretary or someone lower in that ending it?
Yeah.
Going over the head of the person above them. I don't say that without real evidence because I had the Secretary of the Treasury in my presence tell Ray Kelly, no one discloses this operation unless I give them the authority to do it. And that means, and he was very specific, he said, not to the White House, not to the Secretary of State, not to the drug czar, not to the Justice Department, unless, of course, I say, go do it. So there's integrity where you want integrity. And I don't think anyone is willfully blind. They do it intentionally.
Yeah.
They do it with the intent to not do their job.
And I would agree with you, Bill. I would say that the term willful blindness is a softening so that you're not calling anyone out. Because of all the defamation cases and everything else out there, the lawfare that's used by nation states, but also transnational organized crime against people that speak out is immense. It's even worse when they go after the government. So, the government's paying these people out.
Yes.
Because they've got the best lawyers there are. So they don't want anybody to say, so you say, oh, they might not have known about it. Well, come on now.
Please.
The reporting is going there. They're getting all the information. They know what's going on. There's no way around it. In Canada, the RCMP, CSIS, CBSA, they're all junior ministries under the Ministry of Public Safety, which is a political entity. They're all political.
Yeah.
And it's difficult, like you said, for people that are trying to do their jobs, that are out there doing the work, only to find out that, that whole detect, deter, disrupt, enforce, that whole model is, why are we?
It's BS.
Why do people? Yeah, it's a bunch of bullshit.
We know it's BS because we've been there, and we've had them throw the BS in our face, and unfortunately, I'm one of the guys that hands it back to them. But I always did that in person. I never did it, without telling. Nothing I said on 60 Minutes, I didn't say to Ray Kelly's face. Or anyone else that was part of that process, that was intentionally trying to stop us from enforcing the law. And you can say anything you want about pursuing the political head of a government outside the United States, but we have, in fact, done that. We sent the 82nd Airborne into Panama to arrest the president of Panama for doing exactly what the Minister of Defense was doing in Mexico. Now, we didn't need the 82nd Airborne. I could have lured him to Italy because he talked about going there all the time and arrested him there. I mean, there are possibilities other than airstrikes to take out the Mexican cartel. Once you destroy their ability to have their own money, then they pretty much go somewhere else.
And my fear,
and not that I don't believe in airstrikes. I'm a Marine. I wholly believe in close air support. And if I could have called close air support on the cartel at will, I would have done it. So I'm very happy with that. I'm in the infantry. Close air support is an angel from heaven.
Yeah.
So,
And I think there's the technology changes too. Hey, Bill. So the move from strictly, I wouldn't say strictly, but cocaine was a really, major change, I think. And now we're into synthetics. The meth that comes out of China that they use in the mines, flooding through Mexico. Canada's a huge producer of fentanyl. So now you've got that. Then you've got digital currency now. So it's always evolving, but how we go after them, it's not exactly keeping up with it. I remember meeting with the DEA and them saying that with synthetic drugs, you change one molecule, it's no longer a controlled substance, so you can't even get them on that. So how do you stay ahead of that? And I think
chase the money.
that's I was just gonna say. So, and some, like you said, the guy that doesn't I don't need money, right? So certainly money's a driver, but they're into so many industries now. It's not strictly narcotics. When they're talking on when you hear these cartels and other people speaking about narcotics, etc., they're talking like businessmen. They're talking about units of this and transportation security. It's not always
Absolutely.
This low-level drug talk that people seem to think. And they're not always just talking about the narcotics. They're talking about moving commodities and like businesses that are semi-legitimate. They're in the gray zone or whatever, but they're still providing product or whatever. They just happen to also move the money, and some of that's by choice, some of it's not by choice. So those markets are out there, and the illicit funds that are moving are everywhere.
Yeah, I'd say the number one commodity that moves drug cash right now is crude oil.
Hmm.
The number one. And the exchange is almost equal to drug cash.
Especially with the sanctions, like you said, with Venezuela, Iran.
We consume it that quick. Yeah. From Venezuela and from Iran.
Oh.
Both are criminal states.
Russia.
Both are sponsors of terror. And people that don't think Venezuela is a sponsor of terror, they have more Hezbollah and Hamas living in Venezuela than they probably have in the Middle East. Remember that.
And the debt that is in Venezuela is all to China. And then we have the Russians involved there as well. So it's I don't want, what do you want to call it? The axis of evil? I mean, the known threat actors are all part of the transnational narco-terrorism stuff. Yeah.
I had a source from Venezuela send me it's a videotape that they made because they were at the assembly where a Russian naval warfare ship comes into port and the city mayor is presenting the naval captain with the keys to the city. So that shows you the relationship there. The real protectors of Venezuela right now are China, Russia, and Iran. All three have their navies in Venezuelan ports. This theory of the Monroe Doctrine has been out the window for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, just as we come to the end of our time here, are there any people or organizations that are doing a good job, that are going after these people that maybe people should follow or look to? Is there anybody that's really a standout out there?
Please notify me when you identify them. I will bring them gifts.
Yeah.
I will bring them gifts, and I was an asset for our primary intelligence agency for 7 years, and I gave them gifts all the time. And I had two guys quit because their agency rejected the gift, and it was substantial.
Yeah, I think the people that I worked with in the States, at least, DEA, SOD, because they're multinational, and I would say Office of Naval Intelligence, transnational threats. Because in the States, you guys actually can share classified information between law enforcement and military entities.
We share information.
We don't have that in Canada.
I can communicate directly with those people and have, but they will not take the gift.
That's
That's the other part of
They
it.
will not accept the
Yeah.
gift. Yeah. It's not that maybe the guy I'm talking to isn't part of it. Maybe he wants it. That's why he's talking to me. But when he raises it up to the next level, that's when it gets shoved back in his face.
yeah. I saw that with OFAC and FinCEN. Yeah.
I'm not even been informed that people accepted or rejected it. I'm just ghosted. All my emails, texts, and voicemails disappear.
I've had that happen, actually. I've sent some stuff across to the US side of things that I thought, like, wow, this would actually be very interesting. A very high level person. And yeah, just a couple people at the lower levels would talk to you. And then all of a sudden, everybody just stops replying to emails. It's like, what happened? So yeah, it's kind of questionable. So, um, just at the end of our time here, I just want to make sure you guys get a chance to say how people can find you, contact you, or follow your work. So maybe we'll start with you, Bill.
Where how they can find me on LinkedIn. They can find me on Facebook if they like motorcycle racing, and they can find me at Casablanca in consulting and investigations if they're a law firm and they need help. That's where they can find me.
Good stuff. And Scott, for you?
I'm similar. You can find me on LinkedIn, Scott McGregor. I also have a website for my PR stuff, which is hybridwar.ca, or my company, Closehold Intelligence. It's closehold.ca. And you can check me out, give you a little bit of information, some background, let you know what's up.
Yeah, hey, I'm appreciative of both your time, both you guys' time today. And I'll remind people to like, comment, share, follow the Quiet Professional. But I think this will be a mind blowing conversation for a lot of people, but it's a very important conversation right from the ground up. And hopefully we can get this into the right ears and people start paying attention to certain things, right? Ask questions. So, and have a little bit of courage. So I always find that's kind of the tough part for some. Um, but yeah, I think this was a beneficial conversation. And you know what? Maybe we'll have to do a part 2 because we didn't get to everything that I was hoping to get to. But these are some really big topics. So thanks again. And yeah, if you guys have any final closing words.
You're the only guy asking for a podcast on money laundering. No one else is.
Hey, I'll be glad to put you on every day.
Thank you for your yeah. Maybe you can sell it to somebody that cares.
Yeah.
Lots to unpack. I think there's lots more to follow up on, and even some of this historical trend stuff that we can work through as Bill's worked on original stuff, and then see the transition into what's going on nowadays, and start to outline some of that. People will get upset when I say, I've talked about the anti-money laundering and some of the organizations that are making a lot of money off of teaching people about it, but there's no results. So, people are spending thousands of dollars on this training, etc.
Yeah.
Companies are hiring them because it's mandatory for compliance and regulatory work. But fact of the matter is, we don't see anybody going to jail for this stuff. So, I think there's lots of work, and not just in policy, etc., but legislatively and that kind of thing. So, yeah, I think you're doing a good job, Nathan, and hopefully we can get more interest.
Awesome. Yeah, right after this, I do have someone I'm going to get in touch with because I think this episode, once we put it out, will be of interest to them. I'll say the least. So, if you guys hang on the line for a second, I'll say bye offline. But thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nathan.